Today we're going to paint this really cute and fun vintage pumpkin card. You could use it as a card, a note card, or even just kind of as a fun little thing to have on maybe a cover of a sketchbook. So grab all the supplies in the description and let's get started. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to get a little sheet of paper. Now you could do this on a card, but I'm just doing it on just a quarter of a regular sheet of watercolor paper. I've already taped down the edges, and we're doing that so that we maintain a white border and can create this really pretty wash right here. After you tape that down, what you're gonna do is get your pencil. We are going to sketch out this quick little vine and a couple of pumpkins on our paper very lightly before we get started painting. So just like you see here, I'll give you a minute if you want to take a screenshot of this and print it out. This is my original quick sketch before I actually painted my final one. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're just going to create a really loose vine. So I'm just going to kind of copy what I already did here. And the thing I want you to do is actually draw on the tape. Even though we're not going to see it later, you'll see it's important. So I'm just going to make a wiggly line that almost looks like a backwards L. Now, once you have that backwards L, we're going to plop in a few of these leaves, these pumpkin leaves. That's what these are on the vine. And how to do that is you want to start out with a V shape. So right here in this corner, kind of above the vine, because it's going to overlap the vine. So I'm going to put it on top. I'm going to make a little V, a wide V, and then almost like a heart. So you can almost draw like a wiggly heart. Comes down like that. Done. And now I'm going to make another wiggly heart leaf that's kind of facing the other direction. So to do that, you're going to make a V, but it's going to face a different direction. And you're going to do this in different parts. So I'm going to do V, wiggly heart. Or it almost looks like a bat or a butterfly. And then make a couple little ones, V, and draw on the paper, V. Remember, it's just a wiggly heart. And then here, let's do like a little floater one. And let's do a couple down here. I'm going to make another vine that kind of shoots off. And let's do one up here. V, wiggly. And then one that looks like it's been kind of flattened. All right, that is it for our vine and our leaves. Now we're going to fill in with a couple of pumpkins and one blossom. So I'm going to draw my pumpkin first, which you can also start with a V. And I'm going to actually put this behind those leaves that I've already created. And you can make your pumpkin however you want. I'm going to put just a few light lines in here. And before I do those shapes in the back of the pumpkin, I'm going to plop in a stem and do a bunch, just a couple of round shapes to show the back of the pumpkin. It makes it look just a hair more realistic. And then I also, at the top of that stem is an oval. That also adds to making it look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to do the same thing with a smaller pumpkin just up above. And again, you can draw your pumpkin if you've had practice drawing your pumpkin in a few other ways. Feel free to do whatever is comfortable for you. And I'm always going to add those two little kind of rounded shapes in the back because it makes it look a little bit more realistic. Now I'm going to make for our blossom right here. So that's a little yellow blossom. I am going to almost make like this little kind of curved triangle, and then I'm going to make a little wiggly circle on the left hand side of that. That's going to make it look like it has some depth to it and that it's open. So first I'm going to make a line where it's going to connect to the vine, and then I'm going to make that triangle shape, kind of wiggly triangle, and then I'm going to make a wiggly oval and kind of connect it. That's going to be my blossom. Now we're going to need our big brush. We're going to grab our big brush, dip it in our water, really get that brush nice and wet, and then we're going to get plenty of our raw sienna. Now I've already spritzed my tray and kind of woken up my paints. So my paints are ready to go. You want it to be, you don't want it to be super saturated because this is what we're going for. We're just making that nice background layer and we're painting over the entire thing. So let's go ahead. I'm loading my brush and I'm gonna start at the top and kind of sweep down. And I always want to start at the last spot where I painted so that I don't have any lines. So I'm starting at that last spot. I'm always overlapping because with watercolor, you want the paint to be the same level of wetness across the whole section that you're working in so that it dries nice and evenly and it doesn't have any cauliflowering. Now I'm going to meet that. That's it. That is our wash. That's going to be this pretty little background right here. So now that we've added that thin wash, we're going to let it dry before we do anything else. Now let's remove the tape. Now only remove the tape if your paper is completely dry. Mine is mostly dry, but you know me, I'm impatient. Just be really careful because we want to maintain this nice crisp edge. Now, obviously we're not done, but we're working on the border of this. We're going to actually extend over the border. All right, that looks good. Take your pencil and draw back in some of those leaf edges that we just removed. Now, remember when we originally drew this, we drew on the tape. But now we are going to, now that we remove the tape, we're gonna extend those leaves because what we're aiming for is this really nice, fun look where it's like spilling outside of that wash border, okay? We're gonna create that, get that back in there and anything else. And then down here, I had created a bit of a vine that kind of came off and I'm gonna draw one more of my leaves. So it really looks like it's kind of spilling out over that edge. And you're welcome to add any, if you want to add more, keep adding more. I mean, it's totally up to you and I hope you have fun with this. Once you have edited those edges with your pencil, now you want to grab your small number 6 brush and get it wet. And grab a tiny bit of sap green or a really light watered down green. And we're going to paint really lightly right on anything that's green in our image. So that is the vine, the leaves, but we're not adding any value yet. We're not adding any shadows or anything like that. We're just creating a nice light layer just so that we have something that we can build off of. So I'm painting directly. And my brush is almost vertical when I'm trying to create those really thin lines. That's how I'm able to do that, is I bring that brush all the way up, and that's how I'm able to create those itty bitty thin lines in those small spaces. Another tip is to roll your brush before you do that. So you roll the paint like this, kind of roll and lift, and that brings your paintbrush to a nice fine point, and then you're able to get a little bit sharper edges with the tip of your paintbrush. So I am painting directly and just filling this in. So go ahead and fill in anything green, and don't be afraid to make that vine a little bit wider. Let that dry. While that's drying, because it's really thin, it'll dry very quickly, you can create a darker green. So all you're going to do is take a little bit of your sap green, pull it out onto your tray, tiny bit of your hooker's green, pull it on a tray. Mix those two together, and then either grab an orange. Today I'm using burnt sienna, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of that in my green. It just dulls it down so it's not so bright. So a red would also do the same thing because it is a complementary color to green. So it's going to kind of tone it down a little bit. Now what I'm going to do, just like I did here, is I'm going to start to create kind of just some outlines, some really wide outlines. And I'm going to trace each leaf, and I'm going to trace the vine maybe one more time. I'm also going to start adding some of these lines on each one of those leaves. So just take a look. I'm going to roll my brush so I can get a nice fine point. And then I'm going to trace the outside of each leaf. This is going to just give it a little bit more dimension. It's just going to make it pop a tiny bit more before we add the pen. I'm also going to start adding the veins of the leaf. And I'm not worried about how perfect it is. And if you run out of paint, just mix it up again. Remember, I'm using Sap Green, a little bit of Hooker's Green, and a tiny bit of burnt sienna, just to remember, I'm just using that to kind of tone it down and warm it up. So outlines. And you can add a little bit more to that V, or even on top of the V, because that's going to make it look like that leaf is bent. So continue this process for every single leaf. Now we're gonna work on our vines. We're gonna add just a little bit more of that same green that we used for the edge of our leaves on top of our vine. And you can just choose one side of that vine to intensify. You don't have to trace right on top. You're kind of just moving slightly to the side, and it's gonna make the vine look a little bit more rounded and realistic. So just a little bit right there. There. All right, now our vine is totally done. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna use up the rest of this green for the tops of our pumpkins. Now this seems kind of odd, but we're gonna layer up, so don't worry, we're just using this up. We're gonna add a real thin layer of green to the top of that pumpkin, of each one. We're painting the entire thing. And then we're gonna wash our brushes out really well. And we're gonna grab a little bit of either raw sienna, or I'm gonna use some cadmium yellow. And I'm gonna use this to paint a really thin layer on my blossom. I'm gonna paint the whole shape, and then I'm gonna let it dry before I add a little bit of definition with that hollowed part on the inside. So I'm gonna let it dry, and while that's drying, wash your brush out and grab some raw sienna. It's the same color we used for the background, but what we're gonna do now is we're gonna use it in a more concentrated way for the first layer of our pumpkin. So you can paint the entire pumpkin with a more concentrated amount of your raw sienna. And the key here is whenever you do these thin layers, this is called glazing. And you just want to make sure that it's a nice, even and thin layer. You don't want it to be too wet and drippy. So you do a thin layer. If it doesn't look good, you just layer up after it dries. So glazing is just almost like thin sheets of glass or colored glass that kind of layer on top and top and top. And when the more you stack it, the darker it gets. And it's the same thing with watercolor. And now I'm just painting that second pumpkin with the same color. I'm using just raw sienna. You could also use yellow ochre too if you wanted. So we're gonna keep layering up, making each one of those layers a little bit darker than the last one. I'm using my burnt sienna, and I'm just slowly adding some really thin layers on top of my last layer, which is totally dry. And it's almost just like an outline. That's really all I'm doing. You can make these two little pieces in the back of your pumpkin darker. That's going to make it push back, look like it's a little bit further away. Give it a little shadow. Do the same thing here. I'm going to paint those two little pieces in the back of the pumpkin directly. And then I'm going to do my outline method, making my outlines really wide. There we go. And a little bit on the base. We're going to start to build up that shadow. You don't have to do this part, but if you are like me, you like to, you know, have a little bit more shape to whatever you're painting. I'm going to start to build out a tiny, tiny shadow at the base of my pumpkin. Okay. And these are just really thin layers, so it should dry almost immediately. And all I'm doing is kind of blending out those thin layers on top with a damp brush. Now you saw me, I squeezed out some of that moisture, but I wanted to keep some of it in so that when I drag that paint out, there's still enough moisture to actually drag it out instead of just lift it off the page. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give this other little pumpkin a tiny shadow at the bottom. Not much, just a little. And then you can use that same color to trace the outline of your blossom. Give it a little bit more definition. I think we're almost done here. This is looking great. Now take that same color that you have and you can layer up right on top of your stem and just add that color to one side of the stem. That's going to make it look a little bit darker and more like brown. So when you add red, a little bit of red and a little bit of green together, you basically get this nice dark brown. And it's perfect for our pumpkin because some of those pumpkin stems are actually, you know, they're not really dark. Some of them are dark, some of them are light. And they're a little bit more tan. There. And you can fiddle as much as you like. I'm going to keep it pretty basic today. And if you wanted to, you could add another shadow on your pumpkin. You can intensify your burnt sienna with a little bit of Alizarin Crimson, and that's going to make it look a little bit more like a darker orange, kind of a reddish orange. Just make sure that when you apply the paint that it's thin, it's not really wet. Otherwise, you're going to have some issues with cauliflowering, and you're not going to be able to have this nice, smooth, soft kind of layering. It'll look a little, you'll see the edges a bit more than you'd like. So you're welcome to add as many layers as you want. I'm going to go back in with a little bit of this kind of reddish color for some outlines on the back of those pumpkins, because again, look at already just a tiny bit of that and it just pushes those pumpkins back. It gives it a lot more shape and it makes it look even more orange. Let it dry, and then we're going to get out that pen that I might have mentioned earlier. This is a 0.2 Uni Pin water and fade proof pen. I will add a link to this that you can see in the description to the actual pen pack, the set. So once this is dry, we're going to take this pen and we're going to trace the outline. Now it's not necessary, but you know, my first one was really faint and some of the kind of splotchy, and so I traced it because I thought that might make it pop. So you could leave it just as is. I think this is really pretty just without the pen. So you could leave it like that, write a little message, or you could trace it with your pen. So I'm going to show you kind of how I approach the tracing on this one, but you do not have to do that. But I'm going to wait for that to dry before I actually do that layer now. This is a waterproof pen, so you can technically use it before you paint and after you paint. So it's a very versatile pen. And you can trace this if you want, just trace the lines directly. That's mostly what I did in the first one. Or you can kind of trace some areas and leave other areas blank. I think that that's kind of a nice balance. So I'm going to just trace maybe like one side of everything in the painting. I think that's going to give it kind of a neat look. Maybe both, actually. I changed my mind. So I'm tracing the leaves and the vine right now. And one cool thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a break in that middle line of the leaf, in the veins of the leaf, because I think that's going to make it look kind of nice. And I'm not going to trace all the vines. I think those look so good, or not the vines, but the veins on the leaf. I think it looks kind of nice to just leave it. I might leave do a couple that are far away. Okay. And I'm going to trace most of the vine and leave some of the areas that are next to a really light spot untraced, because again, it's going to just make that spot look a little bit brighter. There. And you can do this however you like. You don't have to trace it at all. I just think that this adds a little bit. And you can extend things too. So that's the cool part about the pen. So see what I'm doing right now? I'm tracing my blossom, and I kind of just barely changed the shape of it. How cute is this? So I just finished tracing with my Uni pen, and I think it is so stinking cute. Now this is the point where you could take your beautiful card, you could write a little message here. I've seen a lot of these vintage cards have some sort of like mini poem. May your Thanksgiving be blah, 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 blah. May your fall or autumn be blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot of fun stuff that you could do with this. You could also send this and just say, thanks for that awesome pumpkin pie. Loved it. Right? Okay, so this could literally be for anything. I hope you had a ton of fun painting this, and can't wait to see you next time. Bye-bye.